The fluorescent lights in the conference room flickered erratically, as if even they were exhausted and overwhelmed by the chaos unfolding beneath them. Amidst the tension, Bryce Hamilton, Chief Executive Officer, adjusted his silk tie for the third time in just 10 minutes. Sweat clung to his forehead, and his face flushed a deeper shade of red with each passing second, as if his frustration were reaching a boiling point that no one in the room dared acknowledge. "This is completely unacceptable," he barked, slamming his palm down on the polished wooden table with such force that several coffee cups trembled. The crack of contact echoed throughout the room like a gunshot. "We are losing $12,000 every single hour while this system remains down. $12,000 per hour." Around the oval table, the senior engineers sat frozen like deer caught in high beams on a deserted highway. Sarah, from IT, clutched her pen tightly, flicking the cap open and shut with anxious repetition, as if the movement alone might ground her. Marcus, from development, kept refreshing his laptop screen, clinging to the desperate hope that the errors might resolve themselves. Even Tom, from quality assurance, who could usually be relied on for a sarcastic quip or a groan-worthy pun, was dead silent, eyes cast downward, hands clenched in his lap. And in the far corner of the room, nearly invisible in his worn khaki jacket and unassuming posture, sat a man few noticed anymore. His name they barely remembered. Gary Mitchell, a temporary consultant brought in under the vague pretense of workflow optimization. To most of them, he was as forgettable as the background noise from the vents, a fixture like the office plants or the flickering overhead bulbs. But Gary wasn't watching spreadsheets. He wasn't there for process diagrams or efficiency metrics. No, he was studying people, how they treated one another when they thought no one important was paying attention. And over the last 3 weeks, what he had seen had told him everything he needed to know. Bryce paced the room like a caged animal, his frustration now fully unleashed. "Tomorrow morning we have a major client presentation. And what are we operating on? Duct tape, crossed fingers, and half-baked optimism. Our infrastructure is being held together by hope and chewing gum." Sarah timidly ventured, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've tried everything, sir. The error appears to be buried deep in the legacy code. Tracking it down is like trying to find a needle in—" "I don't want to hear about needles," Bryce snapped, cutting her off mid-sentence, eyes blazing with indignation and wounded pride. "I want solutions, real ones. We are supposed to be the top tech firm in the entire state, and we can't even keep our systems online." Just then, the conference room door creaked open, breaking the tension like a crack in ice. Every head turned toward the sound. A young woman stepped inside hesitantly. Her brown hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded denim jacket over a plain white t-shirt. A weathered backpack hung off one shoulder, frayed at the seams. She looked no older than 19, and her dark eyes carried a quiet, watchful intelligence, the kind that belonged to someone who noticed everything but spoke only when absolutely necessary. "Oh, sorry," she said softly, already stepping back. "I didn't realize there was a meeting. I was just looking for my dad, to tell him I finished my homework early." The awkwardness in her voice was sincere. It wasn't fear. It was the quiet realization that she had stumbled into a space where she clearly wasn't meant to be. She hadn't expected welcome, but she certainly hadn't anticipated this kind of hostility either. Bryce's expression shifted, his fury giving way to something darker. Contempt. "Your dad," he repeated. "Wait, you're Rodriguez's kid? The janitor's daughter?" The way he said it made it sound like an accusation, like the words themselves were dirty and left a foul taste in his mouth. The tension in the room thickened. Several people looked down at their hands or away from the scene entirely. But Gary Mitchell, still holding his notepad, lifted his eyes. For the first time all meeting, he wasn't writing. He was watching. "Yes, sir," the girl replied, politely. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't lash out. She didn't crumble. It was the tone of someone used to being underestimated. "Sorry for the interruption. I'll just... Actually, hold on." Bryce's tone changed, slick and gleaming like oil on water. A cruel smile formed on his face, born of frustration, ego, and a petty need to put someone in their place just to feel taller. In that moment, he wasn't seeking solutions anymore. He was seeking amusement, and standing in front of him was the perfect target. Young, quiet, unimportant. Or so he thought. "You know what?" he said loudly, turning to address the room. "Maybe we're all overthinking this." The room fell silent again. This time, not from tension, but confusion. Even the HVAC system seemed to hush as if waiting for the next blow to land. "Here we are," Bryce continued, "a room full of degree-wielding professionals from top universities. We've thrown money, manpower, and resources at this issue for days, and still nothing." Gary's fingers tightened around his pen. He'd seen this moment play out before in different boardrooms, under different fluorescent lights. The moment when someone's mask slips. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus asked warily. Bryce gestured toward Lena, who stood still in the doorway. "Why not let our young guest here take a crack at it? Kids today are practically born with a keyboard in their hands, right?" A few awkward chuckles flitted through the room, brittle and uncertain. Sarah's face paled. Tom studied his shoelaces with great intensity. Bryce wasn't finished. "Come on, kiddo," he said, voice oozing condescension. "Think you can solve the problem none of these geniuses could?" His tone was thick with mockery. So thick, you could bottle it and sell it as grade A condescension. Lena's cheeks flushed, a deep pink blooming across her face, but her voice didn't waver. "I don't think I'm qualified." "Oh, but I absolutely insist." Bryce clapped his hands together as if he had just discovered the cure for cancer. "In fact, if you manage to fix it, I'll personally make sure you get full credit. Heck, I might even put in a good word with the local community college." Laughter echoed around the room once again, this time thinner, more forced, but it was laughter nonetheless. Gary sat silently, his eyes fixed not on Bryce, but on the girl now standing at the center of the mockery. A room full of adults, mocking a 19-year-old girl simply because she had walked into the wrong room at the wrong time and didn't come from the right background. But what caught Gary's attention more than the cruelty was Lena's reaction. Most people would have stumbled through an apology and backed out in embarrassment. Some might have flushed red, murmured an excuse, and disappeared, letting shame swallow them whole. But Lena did none of that. She took a single step forward. "What kind of error is it?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. The room froze. Even the subtle ambient noise seemed to vanish. Bryce blinked in disbelief. What did you just say?" "What kind of error is the system throwing?" she repeated, firmer this time. "Is it a database issue? A timeout problem? Memory leak?" Gary leaned in slightly, intrigued. That wasn't just a technical question, it was a challenge. It was a question from someone who wasn't intimidated by the hierarchy or the sarcasm. It was someone stepping into the arena, with her head held high. Well, Bryce stammered, the smirk slipping from his face as he realized he had just walked himself into a corner. "It's a cascading failure in the production environment. Multiple subsystems affected. It's complicated." "And when did it start?" Lena asked, not missing a beat. 3 weeks ago," Sarah answered automatically, then looked startled that she had spoken up. "Did anyone check whether the failure coincides with scheduled maintenance windows or external API requests?" Lena continued, Her eyes were sharp now, scanning an invisible grid in her mind. The silence returned, heavier this time. Gary laid his pen down, slowly. Things were no longer going according to plan. Not Bryce's, anyway. "What did you just say?" Bryce asked, his voice losing its earlier mocking edge, now tinged with confusion. "If the issue is intermittent and gradually getting worse, it could be a resource leak," Lena explained, gaining confidence with each word. "Or it could be linked to changes from a third-party vendor. Have any of you looked at the system logs around the initial incident?" Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. Tom looked up from his shoes for the first time in the entire meeting. Potter said, "How do you—" Sarah began, but her voice trailed off, the question unfinished, perhaps because she already knew the answer. Bryce's face changed rapidly, from flushed with arrogance to red with embarrassment. This wasn't supposed to happen. The girl was supposed to wilt under pressure, excuse herself, and leave in silence, and afterward, they'd all share a chuckle about the janitor's kid thinking she could fix their system. But instead, she was doing the one thing none of them had done. She was asking the right questions. "That's enough," Bryce said sharply, trying to reassert control. "The joke's over. Run along now and find your dad, sweetheart. The adults have work to do." But Lena didn't move. Her expression had shifted. The embarrassment was still there, lingering in her flushed cheeks, but it was no longer in charge. What took its place was something harder, something stronger. Resolve. "You dared me," she said quietly but clearly. "I was joking," Bryce said quickly, trying to backpedal. "It was just a—" "But you made the dare in front of everyone," she said, turning her gaze slowly around the room. One by one, eyes met hers, some with pity, others with curiosity. But when her gaze landed on Gary, he saw something unmistakable. Courage, the real kind. "Then I accept," she said. Bryce opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. This was not going according to script. "I accept your challenge, Mr. Hamilton," she said, now loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I want to try to fix your system." The silence that followed was total. Gary could hear the faint sound of his own heartbeat. In his 23 years of corporate life, he had sat through hundreds of meetings, witnessed thousands of power plays and ego-driven meltdowns, but he had never seen anything quite like this. A 19-year-old girl, daughter of the janitor, had just called the bluff of a senior executive in front of his entire team. And from the look on Bryce Hamilton's face, Gary knew things were about to get very interesting. "Fine," Bryce said, teeth clenched. "Fine, but when you fail, and you will fail, I don't want to hear any excuses about how it was too hard or too complicated. Deal?" "Deal," Lena replied, without a trace of hesitation. As she turned to leave, Gary silently wrote in his notebook, "Follow-up, L. Rodriguez." But this time, he wasn't making notes about workflow. This was something else entirely. The game, he realized, had just changed. 3 hours later, the office was nearly deserted. Only the janitorial crew and a few late-night stragglers remained. Lena sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor outside Conference Room B. Her laptop was open on her knees, connected to the guest Wi-Fi network. Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, the quiet clack of keystrokes echoing down the empty hallway. In that moment, she was just a girl with a computer in a vast, indifferent machine. But deep down, Lena knew this was the moment everything could change. For the past 20 minutes, she'd been staring at the same system logs, but her mind kept drifting back to a night 2 years earlier. A quiet evening in a cramped apartment, where an old man with silver hair and calloused hands sat across from her at the kitchen table, tapping gently at the keyboard. "What exactly is programming?" she had asked him. Arthur had smiled, his voice raspy but warm. Programming, Mija, isn't just about writing lines of code. It's about learning how systems think. And sometimes, the most elegant solution is the one no one's expecting. She was 17 then, struggling with algebra and half convinced that computers were beyond her reach. But there was something about the way Arthur worked. Calm, methodical, like solving a riddle only he could see the shape of, that made her want to try. "You really want to learn?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "I don't know," she admitted. I like the way you look when you're working, like you're piecing together a puzzle, and I like puzzles." And that was the beginning. What Lena never knew, what Arthur had never told her, was that the puzzles they worked on late into the night weren't just abstract exercises. They were pieces of the core architecture powering the very company whose halls she now walked. The infrastructure she was now navigating wasn't unfamiliar by accident. Arthur Donovan had been the lead systems architect for Pinnacle Tech for over 15 years before being quietly forced into retirement after a minor heart attack. His name had been forgotten by most, like the dust-covered manuals in the company archives. Everyone, that is, except for Miguel, her father, the night shift janitor who had struck up a friendship with the quiet old engineer during shared breaks and long silences. Arthur had once told her, "Legacy systems are like old houses. People keep adding rooms, repainting walls, patching over problems, but no one ever looks at the original blueprint. That's where the real issues hide." Lena remembered those words now as she studied the logs Sarah had reluctantly given her access to. The errors weren't random. They had a rhythm. Irregular but not chaotic, like a heartbeat with occasional skips. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to a contact labeled simply, "Arthur. I know it's late, but I could use some advice. Remember what you taught me about cascading failures?" The response came in less than 2 minutes. "Up, working on my model trains." "What kind of cascade are we talking about?" "Good. Now, if it's not a memory leak or CPU overload, what's next?" "Network traffic, database connections, file handlers." "Excellent. So, what if the problem isn't coming from your code?" That question stopped her cold. Until now, Lena had assumed the issue was internal, something broken within Pinnacle Tech's own architecture. But what if that assumption was wrong? "Arthur, what if someone added something to the system they weren't supposed to?" Her phone rang immediately. Arthur's voice was sharper than she'd ever heard it. "Lena, what are you seeing?" She described everything in detail: strange external IP addresses accessing the system, suspicious database queries at off hours, and a spike in bandwidth usage that correlated with the system's worst outages. Arthur didn't respond right away. There was a long silence on the line, and then, "Mija, you need to be careful. What you're describing sounds like someone siphoning off system resources, using the company's infrastructure for something unauthorized. Or worse, there's a shadow system running underneath the surface, a kind of parasitic process. It's clever, and it's dangerous." Lena's pulse quickened. The implications crashed into her all at once. "Arthur, the executive who dared me to fix the error, he said vendors had been working on this issue for weeks. But what if? What if he already knows what's causing it? What if he doesn't want it fixed?" "Lena," Arthur cut in, his voice deadly serious now. "Document everything. Don't fix it yet, and don't tell anyone. You need to understand. People expect you to fail. That means you have the element of surprise. Use it wisely." After the call, Lena sat still in the dark hallway for a long time, her laptop resting in her lap, the system logs still flickering on the screen. She remembered something Arthur once told her. The most important skill in programming isn't writing code, it's recognizing patterns. And the pattern she saw now wasn't technical, it was human. It was greed. Systematic, well-disguised, and deeply embedded greed, hiding not in the open but behind clever layers of code and vague error reports. Over the next 2 hours, Lena documented everything: the unauthorized data streams, the external endpoints with no legitimate purpose, the hidden database queries. Each breadcrumb led her closer to a chilling realization. Someone was using Pinnacle Tech's infrastructure to run a secret, illegal operation. By the time her father arrived at 3 a.m. for his night shift, Lena was ready. "Miguel, what are you still doing here?" Miguel asked, pushing his janitorial cart down the quiet corridor. "Just working on a little project, Papa." She smiled, folding her laptop closed. "And I think I just solved it." She didn't tell him that this solution might unravel everything: the company, her life, and especially the man who had dared her to try. The next morning, Lena walked into the grand lobby of Pinnacle Tech with a small USB drive in her jacket pocket, and yet it felt like she was carrying a stone of destiny. It was light, but it held weight. She dropped off the report at the IT support desk, where Kevin, a junior developer who normally treated her like air, actually looked up in surprise. You're that girl from yesterday, right? The one Mr. Bryce." "Yeah," Lena cut in gently. "I found the cause of the issue, and I included a full fix." Kevin stared as she handed over a printed report and the USB drive. "You're serious?" "Completely," she said, her tone even. "And you might want to escalate it. This isn't just a system bug." Before Kevin could ask anything else, she turned and walked away. She had a class to attend. Her part was done. Whatever happened next wasn't hers to control anymore. She didn't see Kevin flip open the file and gasp. Didn't see him grab the phone and call his supervisor. Didn't see Gary Mitchell, Langford, arrive in the IT department 15 minutes later after a sleepless night of watching everything unfold. But 3 hours later, as Lena walked past the server room on her lunch break, she did hear the commotion. "No way, the entire production environment just stabilized." "The memory leaks are gone," someone else said. "The bottlenecking queries too, even the network latencies cleaned up. Who fixed this?" "No idea. It came through a standard internal ticket. But the patch, it's perfect. They didn't just plug the leak. They nuked the root cause." Lena allowed herself a quiet smile. Arthur would have been proud, but the smile faded as she heard the heavy footsteps approaching from behind. "Bucks. Well, look who it is. Our very own computer prodigy." Rice's voice, smug and sarcastic, oozed behind her like oil. Lena turned slowly. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and his eyes, those cold, panicked eyes, betrayed far more than annoyance. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton," she said evenly. "I heard the system's working again." "Flawlessly," he said, stepping closer, voice dropping into a snarl, "so flawlessly that people are starting to ask questions." Behind him stood 2 other men, Mr. Richards from procurement and Mr. Stevens from operations. Neither looked comfortable. Their eyes darted to Lena, then quickly away. "What kind of questions?" Lena asked. "About vendor contracts, about what's been going on inside our systems, and most importantly, about who knows more than they're letting on." Each word came like a stone hitting water, sharp, deliberate, and full of weight. Lena felt her chest tighten. The storm had arrived. She never expected her patch to draw attention. If anything, she'd hoped for a polite nod of recognition, maybe a quiet thank you. She certainly hadn't anticipated the glare of corporate suspicion, or the mounting hostility of Bryce Hamilton, who now looked as if he might explode. "I just fixed the system errors," she said cautiously, her voice steady despite the tremor in her spine. "Like you dared me to." Bryce stepped even closer, his tone dark and venomous. "You did more than that. You went snooping where you didn't belong. You found things that weren't meant to be found." The hallway seemed to shrink around them. The usual sounds, keyboards, phones, footsteps, vanished under a blanket of unnatural silence. "I documented everything in my report," Lena said, not backing down. "The unauthorized traffic, the foreign IP addresses, the resource drain disguised as system bugs." "Shut up," Bryce hissed, his voice no longer pretending to be calm. "You have no idea what you've done." "Actually," a new voice cut in, calm, firm, and suddenly commanding. "I think she knows exactly what she's done." Everyone turned. Gary Langford, walked toward them, no longer the forgettable consultant from the corner of the room. His stride was confident, his shoulders squared, and his eyes, sharp, deliberate, watchful, left no doubt about who he really was. "Gary?" Bryce's voice faltered, panic rising. This doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it concerns me deeply, Mr. Hamilton," Gary replied, stepping beside Lena like a general joining his lieutenant. "You see, I've been conducting a full audit of Pinnacle Tech's internal operations and corporate culture, and Miss Rodriguez's discovery has been incredibly illuminating." Behind Bryce, Richards and Stevens looked like men standing on the edge of a cliff, fully aware that the ground was about to give way. "I don't understand," Lena murmured, eyes darting between them. Gary turned to her, his voice softening, almost like a teacher offering reassurance. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I believe now is the right time for a proper introduction. My real name isn't Gary Mitchell. It's Gary Langford." He held out his hand. "I'm the CEO of Pinnacle Tech." The hallway was silent. Not a whisper, not a shuffle of shoes, just the thrum of fluorescent lights above, as Gary's voice cut through the stillness with unwavering clarity. "And thanks to her outstanding work," he said, his tone calm but resolute, "we now have definitive proof that Mr. Hamilton has been operating a shell company to siphon company server resources for personal gain." Bryce didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, like a man watching the foundations of his career crumble beneath his feet, one slow collapse at a time. "The only question now," Gary added, voice deep and deliberate, "is what we intend to do about it." 30 minutes later, the executive boardroom was overflowing. The news had spread like wildfire, sparking murmurs and speculation in every hallway. Clustered in groups, employees whispered and stared, their gazes inevitably settling on the 19-year-old girl sitting at the center of the long mahogany table. The same girl who didn't even exist on the company org chart. Lena sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding like it wanted to escape her rib cage. To her left was Gary, not the quiet consultant anymore, but the company's CEO in full command, and to her right, Bryce Hamilton. No longer the polished executive, but a hollowed man, pale-faced, his eyes darting across the room as if hoping for some unseen escape route. Heads of departments, HR executives, and legal counsel were all present. Everyone sat upright, but their eyes flicked toward Lena, this girl, the janitor's daughter, now in the center of a reckoning. Gary placed a thick binder on the table and opened the meeting with a calm voice that filled the room like the slow build-up before a thunderstorm. "Before we begin," he said, "I want everyone here to understand what's really happening." A ripple of whispers passed through the crowd like a shiver. Sarah from IT went visibly pale, likely replaying every complaint she'd ever made in front of the so-called consultant. "I've been observing this company's operations and internal culture for the past month," Gary continued, flipping open a well-worn notebook filled with handwritten notes. "I've documented how employees treat one another, especially how upper management interacts with staff lower down the ladder." He began reading aloud, flipping page by page. "March 15th, witnessed Mr. Hamilton verbally berate a junior employee for asking a clarifying question. March 18th, janitorial staff ignored, offered no greetings or basic support by floor supervisors. March 22nd, multiple instances of language mocking employee backgrounds and education levels. Bryce shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. Others began fidgeting as well. But something remarkable happened yesterday, Gary said, his voice tightening with gravity. Faced with a critical system failure, instead of seeking solutions, Mr. Hamilton chose to publicly mock a young woman, the only person in the room who dared ask the right questions. All eyes turned toward Lena, her cheeks flushed with heat, but she didn't look away. Not this time. What Mr. Hamilton didn't realize, Gary said, spreading printed reports across the table, is that I had already initiated an internal investigation, and the logs never lie. He explained everything in precise detail. How server resources had been quietly drained, how network traffic spiked during non-peak hours, how hidden database queries left behind a trail. We brought in a third-party security firm, Gary said, pulling out one final folder, and they confirmed that Quantum Solutions LLC, a vendor supposedly paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, does not exist. No office, no staff, no website, just a name created to funnel money and resources from our internal systems. He looked directly at Bryce. Would you like to explain why the listed owner of Quantum Solutions has your home address, your social security number, and your personal bank account tied to its billing? Bryce opened his mouth, then closed it again. A moment passed. He tried once more, his voice a whisper. You don't understand. There were budget cuts, pressure to meet projections. I was just trying to create a secondary stream of income, one that I planned to reinvest into your personal accounts. Gary cut in sharply. The room erupted into hushed gasps and quick glances. The company's legal counsel scribbled furiously. HR managers exchanged silent, grave looks. The most extraordinary thing about this, Gary continued, voice steady, is that none of it would have come to light without someone outside of our formal ranks, someone dismissed, mocked, and belittled, who, despite that, took it upon herself to fix what our highest-paid experts couldn't even find. He looked around the table. So we must ask ourselves, what are our real hiring criteria? How do we measure potential, and who do we choose to elevate or ignore? Turning back to Bryce, Gary delivered the final blow with clinical clarity. Mr. Hamilton, you are terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you off the premises. The legal system will handle the rest. Bryce rose, but barely. His steps were slow, stiff, and silent. His empire, built on arrogance and shadow, was gone. Once the door closed behind him, Gary turned to Lena. Now, Miss Rodriguez, we need to talk. At 2 p.m., a company welcome announcement was held in the main auditorium. Lena sat in the very last row, the same USB still clutched in her hand, the device that had not only changed her future, but had possibly altered the course of the entire company. Around her, nearly 300 employees whispered nervously. The room pulsed with anxious energy. No one knew exactly what to expect, only that Pinnacle Tech had just survived a corporate earthquake. By now, most of you have heard rumors, Gary began, his voice rich and clear through the speakers. I'm here to provide you with the truth. He detailed everything, the silent investigation, the layers of fraud, the immediate termination of Bryce Hamilton and 2 senior procurement managers complicit in the scheme. He didn't mention Lena by name, but she felt eyes turning toward her the moment Gary said, it was an outside perspective that opened the door to the truth. And the financial loss is significant, he added. We estimate over $400,000, 0 cents worth of corporate resources were diverted. Legal proceedings are already underway. We expect to recover most of it. A hand shot up from the engineering team. "Sir, how do we know there aren't other issues like this?" "A good question," Gary replied with a nod. "And that's precisely why this evaluation began in the first place. Starting today, we are implementing stricter oversight, scheduled security audits, and, most importantly, a full review of our hiring and promotion policies." After the meeting, Lena tried to slip out quietly through the back, but Gary's voice caught her mid-step at the door. "Ms. Rodriguez, could I see you in my office for a moment?" 20 minutes later, she sat across from him in the CEO's suite. No longer the quiet observer, Gary now sat with presence, a man who held both power and clarity in his hands. On the screen in front of him was her file. Community college, part-time student, GPA 3.8 in computer science fundamentals. 2 part-time jobs to cover tuition, living at home to save costs. He turned toward her, not as a CEO to a subordinate, but as a mentor who wanted to understand. "Tell me about your plans." Lena spoke slowly, carefully. "I want to finish my associate's degree, then maybe transfer to a 4-year university, if I can afford it. I'd like to pursue computer science or software engineering." "What sparked your interest?" She hesitated, then told the truth. "I had a mentor, not a formal teacher, but someone who made me see that coding wasn't just about syntax. It was about solving problems, thinking in systems, noticing patterns others miss." "Was it someone from school?" "No, sir." She inhaled deeply. "It was Arthur Donovan. He used to stop by during my dad's night shifts. He offered to teach me programming, just as a hobby." Gary froze. Arthur Donovan, tall, gray beard, always carries a stack of tech books. He leaned back, looking amazed. "Miss Rodriguez, Arthur Donovan designed the core systems this company runs on. He was our lead architect for 15 years before retiring. He built the backbone of Pinnacle Tech." Lena blinked. "He never told me that." "That's Arthur," Gary said, with the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Always quiet, never one to boast. But that explains how you saw what others missed yesterday. You weren't guessing. You were using knowledge from the person who built our foundation." Before Lena could respond, Gary's assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, someone's here. Says he has information regarding the Rodriguez report. He's quite insistent. To send him in." The door opened. Arthur Donovan stepped into the room, grizzled, kind-amied, and radiating that quiet strength Lena had always known. But here, in this setting, surrounded by glass walls and executive decor, his presence felt legendary. "Arthur," Gary stood to greet him. "Good to see you, Gary." Arthur nodded before his gaze found Lena. "Mija, I came as soon as I heard. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, but Arthur, why didn't you tell me you used to work here?" Arthur took the seat beside her. "Because I wanted you to learn out of love, not ambition. But when your dad called me this morning, I had to come. This girl has more natural skill than most engineers I worked with in 30 years. Gary nodded. "Arthur, did you know she identified the security breach?" "I suspected," Arthur said, "from the way she described the error patterns, but I didn't expect fraud." His eyes darkened. "Hamilton always had ambition, but I never thought he'd resort to theft." "There's more," Gary added grimly. "Initial reviews show irregularities dating back nearly 2 years." "How deep does it go?" "We're still digging, but one thing's certain. If she hadn't accepted Hamilton's dare, we might never have found any of this." He turned to Lena. He was getting bolder, sloppier. He would have caused far more damage before being caught. Arthur placed a hand gently on Lena's shoulder. "I always told you, great programmers see what others miss." Gary leaned forward. And now, Miss Rodriguez, I have a proposition. Arthur Donovan, tall man, silver beard, always carried a stack of tech manuals. You know him? Gary asked, the trace of a smile tugging at the edge of his usually stern expression. Lena nodded. For the first time that day, Gary truly smiled. It wasn't corporate or courteous, it was recognition, tinged with something more personal. Arthur Donovan built most of this company's core infrastructure. He was our chief systems architect for 15 years before retiring. You're learning from the very man who laid the digital foundation we all stand on. Before Lena could form a reply, Gary's assistant knocked briskly on the door. Sir, there's someone here insisting he has urgent information regarding the Rodriguez investigation. He's very persistent. Gary raised an eyebrow. Send him in. The door opened, and there he was. Arthur Donovan stepped inside the room, his hands still calloused from years at the keyboard, his posture humble but grounded, his gaze warm, patient. The years had etched stories into the lines of his face, but there was a spark in his eyes that Lena had always thought belonged to someone ordinary. Now she knew better. Arthur, Gary greeted, standing quickly and offering a firm handshake. It's good to see you again. Hello, Gary, Arthur replied with a nod. Then he turned to Lena. Mija, I came as soon as I heard. Are you okay? Lena's throat tightened, her eyes glassy. I'm all right, just surprised. Why didn't you ever tell me you worked here? Arthur sat beside her and took her hand in both of his. Because I wanted you to learn for the love of it, not because you thought it might land you a job. Passion first, purpose follows. But this morning, when Miguel told me everything that happened, he turned to Gary, his voice steady with conviction. This young woman has more natural skill than most engineers I mentored over an entire career. Gary nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces falling into place. Now I see it. Arthur, did you know she uncovered a major security vulnerability? Arthur's expression grew somber. I suspected she'd stumble onto something. She's meticulous in ways that remind me of the best we ever had. But fraud? That's heavier than I expected. He sighed. Hamilton was always hungry for more, but I didn't think he'd betray the integrity of the company. Gary folded his hands. It's not just him. Evidence shows misconduct stretching back nearly 2 years. If Lena hadn't stepped in when she did, this operation might have continued unchecked. Arthur looked at Lena, pride radiating from his quiet demeanor. I told you before, the best programmers don't just write code, they see what others miss. You saw through shadows most wouldn't have even noticed. Gary nodded and then straightened in his chair. His tone turned official, but not cold. Arthur, we're overhauling the entire security infrastructure. I need someone I can trust leading that change. I'd like to offer Lena a full-ride scholarship to complete her university degree. In addition, we'll provide a paid internship so she can work hands-on with our security team while she studies. She'll need a mentor, Arthur said softly, a knowing grin breaking through his seriousness. Exactly, Gary replied. Then he turned back to Lena. You've earned this moment, he said gently. Now the choice is yours. What path do you want to take? Lena looked from Gary to Arthur, her mind reeling, not from fear but from the weight of the opportunity, from the sheer scale of what had changed. Once she was just the janitor's daughter, just a girl with questions no one wanted to hear, and now the people in charge were asking her what she wanted. Her world was shifting beneath her, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she was falling. She inhaled slowly, heart thudding like a distant drum, and nodded. I want to stay. I want to build something real. 6 months later, Lena Rodriguez walked through the wide glass lobby of Pinnacle Tech, her steps no longer hesitant but purposeful. The same place that once treated her like background noise now welcomed her like an integral part of its rhythm. Security guards gave her respectful nods. People who used to ignore her now smiled, called her by name. Her company badge, Cybersecurity Fellow, wasn't just a title. It was a declaration of arrival. Her story had traveled faster than any press release. The girl who exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud while interning, she became a symbol of overlooked genius, of second chances, of what's possible when talent meets opportunity. 3 universities had offered her full scholarships. 2 tech giants wanted her in their internship programs. A national cybersecurity firm invited her to keynote a major conference. But she'd turned them all down. Because here, was where she felt she could do the most good. Not just learn, but protect. Not just rise, but lift others with her. "Morning, Lena," Sarah from the help desk called out. Once she'd barely acknowledged her. Now she often sought her input before pushing updates. "You ready for the big presentation?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Lena replied, smiling, but butterflies still fluttered madly in her stomach. This wasn't just another briefing. Today, she would be presenting the full redesign of Pinnacle's security infrastructure, one that was already being modeled across the industry. But before she could speak to the board, there was someone else she had to speak to first. In the break room, Miguel, her father, sat across from Arthur, both sipping coffee, exchanging familiar words in quiet tones. It had become their routine, 2 men from different walks of life, united by their care for the same girl. "Mija," Miguel stood and hugged her. "How are you feeling about today?" "Nervous," she admitted, "but it's the good kind of nervous." Arthur chuckled. "I was 37 at my first board presentation. My knees were knocking like drumsticks." "You had more experience," Lena said. "I have. Good teachers." She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. This wasn't just a mentorship, it was a bond, formed in late nights, strange bogs, and quiet encouragements. A family by spirit, not by blood. Arthur tilted his head. "Have you made a decision about Stanford yet?" He sighed. "A full scholarship to one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Who could turn that down?" "I've been torn," she said honestly. "Part of me wants to go. It's Stanford. But another part feels like your work isn't finished here," Miguel offered. Lena nodded. "There's still something real I can build here. Something that matters." In that quiet moment, Lena Rodriguez, the girl who once sat on hallway floors with a laptop on her knees, realized something profound. To change the world, you don't need a title. You just need to step into the light and accept the challenge no one else dared to face. Arthur's eyes glistened slightly as he looked at her. "When I first started here 30 years ago," he said, "I thought the most important thing was building a perfect system, clean code, elegant logic, tight architecture." He paused, his voice rough with age and emotion. "Took me decades to realize it's not about the system. It's about building a place where people like you can thrive." Lena didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat tightened with emotion. She simply looked at him. The man who had believed in her before she had ever believed in herself. Before she could say anything, Gary appeared at the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his tone formal but his eyes warm. "The board is ready." She nodded. Her presentation was more than just good, it was transformative. Lena walked the board through the journey, from the first moment she saw the anomaly to the full remediation plan, from the cultural rot that enabled it to the new protocols that would keep it from returning. She spoke not just as a technician, but as someone who had lived the cracks in the system. When she finished, the room held its breath. And then the chairwoman, an elegant woman with silver hair and fire in her eyes, spoke. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is extraordinary work. But I have to ask, what's your long-term plan? Can Pinnacle Tech keep someone like you?" Lena opened her mouth to reply, but Gary leaned forward. "Actually," he said, "that's why we're here today." He turned to Lena. Rodriguez, we would like to offer you the position of Director of System Security, effective upon your graduation. The position comes with a generous salary, full benefits, and a dedicated budget to build your own team." Lena held her breath. Her heart skipped a beat. That's an incredibly generous offer. "But there's one more thing," Gary interjected, his voice suddenly full of quiet emotion. "We're also founding the Donovan Rodriguez Security Initiative, a program designed to find and support young talent from all walks of life. We want you to help lead it." Arthur's eyes glistened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Lena had never seen him like this, not as a teacher, not even as a mentor, but as a father watching his child step onto the podium of their first great triumph. "With both our names," he whispered, his voice unsteady. "It's only fitting," Gary replied, a rare smile touching his lips. "You laid the foundation. Lena showed us how to protect it." Lena looked around the room. Just months ago, the people seated here had seemed like distant giants, untouchable, immovable. Now, they watched her with quiet respect. She glanced at Gary, the man who believed in her when she was just a nobody with a laptop. Then to Arthur, the man who once handed her a second-hand programming book and lit the spark that changed her life. And finally, she turned her gaze toward the wide office window. Beyond the glass, in the parking lot, sat her father's old Honda, faded and dented among sleek black Teslas and polished BMWs. Her thoughts drifted to Stanford, the full-ride scholarship, the dream millions would give anything for. "Stanford," she murmured under her breath, almost to herself. Gary heard. "Stanford will always be there," he said gently. "But the chance to build something meaningful, from the ground up? That's rare." 6 months ago, she had been just the janitor's daughter, finishing homework in forgotten meeting rooms. Now she was being asked to help shape the future of corporate security. Lena took a long, steady breath. She looked back at the room, then nodded. "Feeling like I accept all of it." And in the far corner, the newly hired young manager, the one who had replaced Bryce Hamilton, chosen specifically for his collaborative leadership style, quietly took notes. He had just learned his first real lesson in leadership. It doesn't come from title or tenure. It comes from courage and purpose. 6 months later, Lena Rodriguez stepped into the main lobby of Pinnacle Tech once more. But this time, she wasn't invisible. The security guards greeted her with nods of respect. Employees who once brushed past her now smiled, called her by name. The badge on her chest read, "Lena Rodriguez, Acting Director of System Security." Just a few words, but they carried the weight of a life transformed. The media had told her story, but what moved Lena most wasn't the headlines. It was the doors now opening for people like her. She'd turned down Stanford, not because she wasn't good enough, but because here, she had the chance to build something bigger. Under Arthur's guidance, now her official mentor. She wasn't just learning to be an engineer. She was helping shape a new security culture for the entire industry. That morning, she stopped by the break room, where her father, Miguel, sat drinking coffee with Arthur, just as they had every morning since that fateful day. "Mia," Miguel said, standing and hugging her. "You ready?" "Nervous," Lena smiled, "but the good kind of nervous." Arthur laughed. "I remember my first board presentation. I was 37 and shaking like a leaf." "I've got a better teacher than you did," she replied, squeezing his arm, eyes full of quiet gratitude. "Family, no need for blood to define it." Arthur looked at her for a long moment, then asked softly, "What about the offer from Stanford?" Lena sighed. The acceptance letter still sat on her desk at home. But her heart, it was here. A part of me wants to go. I mean, it's Stanford, she said honestly, but the other part knows there's unfinished work here. Miguel finished for her. She nodded slowly. Work that matters, work that changes things. Because some journeys aren't about leaving where you came from. They're about turning that place into something better. Something that wasn't there before. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Moments of Quiet Truth, where we believe that one small act, one unexpected challenge, or one underestimated girl can change the world.